I am Maya, 31 years old. I stood in our family's $4 million Buckhead mansion while my mother ordered me to kneel and beg. 27 relatives pointed and laughed, mocking the quiet accountant of the family. They thought kicking me out would break my spirit. They thought they had won. Instead, I simply poured a glass of iced water, said okay, and walked away. They had no idea I held the deeds, their massive debt, and the absolute power to destroy their fake empire by sunrise. Before I share how I legally dismantled their lives without shedding a single tear, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever stood up to toxic family members. Get out right now and do not come back until you kneel on this floor and beg your older sister for forgiveness. My mother, Corinne, screamed so loudly, her voice echoed off the grand marble foyer. Her face was flushed with rage, her manicured finger pointing directly at the heavy oak front door. Around the room, 27 extended relatives from the Zion Church congregation watched the spectacle like primetime television. My aunts chuckled behind their hands. My cousins exchanged amused glances. I stood there in my simple gray suit, the stark opposite of the flashy designer gowns surrounding me. For my entire life, this was my designated role. I was the scapegoat, the plain sister, the quiet disappointment allowed in these elite Buckhead gatherings, only to serve as a contrasting backdrop to my perfect older sister, Alicia. Alicia stood next to my mother, dramatically dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a silk tissue. She was wearing a custom white dress that cost more than some people earn in a month. She sniffled, leaning into the protective arm of her husband, Spencer. Spencer was a white investment director who always looked down on me. He patted Alicia on the shoulder, shaking his head at me. "I cannot believe you would be so selfish," Maya Alicia cried out, ensuring her voice carried to the back of the room. "I am trying to celebrate my husband's massive promotion to senior director tonight. This is the most important milestone of our lives, and you deliberately tried to humiliate us by refusing to pitch in for the celebration fund." I looked at the crystal pitcher on the catering table next to me. Slowly and deliberately, I picked it up and poured myself a glass of iced lemon water. The ice cubes clinked softly against the glass. The sheer calm of my reaction seemed to infuriate my mother even more. "Did you hear what your sister just said?" Corinne demanded, stepping closer. "You are an absolute embarrassment to this family. We ask you for one simple favor, one contribution of $50,000 to secure the luxury yacht rental for Spencer's promotion gala next week, and you say no." I took a slow sip of my water. $50,000 for a party rental, I said quietly. My voice was steady, completely devoid of the panic they were so desperately trying to provoke. "That is not a small favor. It is pocket change for people who actually understand how wealth operates," Spencer interjected. He adjusted his expensive watch and offered me a condescending smile. "Look, Maya, you are just a standard bookkeeper. You do not understand the cash flow required to maintain our status in Atlanta. You do not understand high-level networking. But Alicia and I are operating at a different tier. We represent Black excellence. We are building generational wealth, and this gala is an investment. You refusing to contribute is you trying to sabotage our success out of pure jealousy." Alicia nodded vigorously, playing the perfect victim. "She has always been jealous of me, Spencer. Ever since I pledged my sorority and she went to a public university, she has resented me. And now that I have married a brilliant financial mind who elevated my lifestyle, she just cannot stand it. She wants to see us fail." I watched Alicia wipe away another invisible tear. Her performance was impeccable, designed entirely to turn the surrounding relatives against me. And it was working. Aunt Denise scoffed from the back of the room, muttering about my ingratitude. "You need to learn your place," my mother hissed, stepping close enough to smell her expensive perfume. "Your sister married into real money. She is securing our family's standing in high society. Meanwhile, you crunch numbers for pennies. We included you tonight out of pity. We gave you a chance to be part of something bigger, and you throw it in our faces." The room fell silent, waiting for me to break. They expected tears. They expected me to crumble under their collective disapproval. They expected me to fall to my knees, beg for forgiveness, and find a way to take out a loan just to appease them. Instead, I finished my water and set the glass down on the table with a soft thud. I looked at Corinne, then at Alicia, and finally at Spencer, whose smug expression remained glued to his face. "Okay," I said. The single word hung in the quiet room. My mother blinked momentarily, thrown off balance by my complete lack of resistance. "Okay," what she snapped. "Okay, I will leave," I replied evenly. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. "I am not giving you $50,000 for a yacht party, and I refuse to kneel, so I will pack my things and get out." The relatives erupted into fresh laughter. My mother crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk replacing her rage. "That is right," she mocked. "Go pack your cheap clothes into your cheap car and drive away, and do not even think about calling us when you realize you have absolutely no one else." I turned away from the laughing crowd and walked toward the grand staircase. My heart did not break. My hands were not shaking. Climbing the carpeted steps, leaving their cruel laughter behind, I felt only cold, sharp clarity. They thought I was running away in defeat. They thought they held all the power. They did not know that by kicking me out, they just handed me the match to burn their fraudulent world to the ground. I stopped halfway up the grand mahogany staircase. The silence I left behind was apparently too much for my mother to handle. People like Corinne cannot stand being ignored. They need you to fight back, to cry, to engage, because your pain is the fuel that keeps their fragile egos inflated. I heard her heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor as she marched to the bottom of the steps. She was not done with me yet. "Do not you dare walk away from me when I am speaking to you," she yelled, her voice echoing up the high ceilings. "You think you are so much better than us with your silent treatment, but you are nothing. You have always been nothing. Look at your sister." Alicia understood what it meant to uphold our family name. She pledged the right sorority. She built a network. She represents the pinnacle of our community. And what did you do? You rejected our legacy to go hide at some mediocre state university. You surround yourself with nobodies. The relatives murmured their agreement. Aunt Denise loudly whispered to a cousin about how I had always been the difficult child. My mother pointed a manicured finger up at me. "You sit in a gray cubicle from 9 to 5 doing low-level bookkeeping for a company no one has ever heard of. You crunch numbers for middle-class wage earners, and you think you have the right to look down on us. We live in Buckhead. We entertain city council members and corporate executives. Alicia married a man who manages millions of dollars before lunch. You are a 31-year-old glorified human calculator who cannot even afford a decent dress for a family gathering." I looked down at her. Her face was contorted with genuine disgust. She truly believed every word she was saying. She had convinced herself that my quiet life was a symptom of incompetence rather than a deliberate choice to stay away from her toxic drama. Then Spencer stepped forward. He placed a calming hand on my mother's shoulder, playing the role of the rational, benevolent patriarch. He looked up at me and sighed slowly, loosening his designer silk tie, as if the sheer weight of my ignorance was exhausting him. "Let it go, Corinne," he said smoothly. "Maya just does not understand how real wealth is generated." He took a step up the staircase, closing the physical distance just enough to assert his dominance. He looked at me with a patronizing smile that made my stomach churn. "Listen to me." Maya Spencer began using the slow, deliberate tone one might use to explain a simple concept to a slow child. "You operate in a world of pennies and spreadsheets. You balance checkbooks. That is fine for someone with your limited ambitions. But the world Alicia and I operate in is built on leverage, capital allocation, and high-stakes networking. The $50,000 we asked you for was not just for a party. It was an investment in optics. In our circle, perception is reality. If I host a gala on a luxury yacht, it signals to my investors that my fund is thriving. It brings in millions in new capital." He paused, letting his words sink in, making sure the 27 relatives behind him were hanging on his every word. "You do not grasp the concept of strategic debt or venture capital," he continued, "and I do not blame you. It is outside your scope of understanding. But your refusal to support the family ecosystem is exactly why you are stuck at the bottom of the corporate ladder. You lack vision." Alicia stepped up next to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You are wasting your breath, babe," she said sweetly. Maya has always been terrified of taking risks. She is perfectly happy being a nobody. Spencer chuckled softly. "Well, I am a generous man. I believe in charity, especially for family." He looked back up at me, his blue eyes gleaming with arrogant superiority. "Tell you what, Maya. Since you are going to be out on the street tonight, I can make a call tomorrow morning. My firm always needs low-level data entry clerks to input receipts and file expense reports in the basement archives. It pays minimum wage, but it is honest work. And it will keep you off the unemployment line. Consider it a pity offer from your brother-in-law." The room erupted into a chorus of approving voices. My aunts praised Spencer for his incredibly generous heart. My mother beamed, looking at him like he was the savior of our family. They all looked at me, waiting for my reaction. They wanted me to explode. They wanted me to scream about how unfair they were being. They wanted to see me humiliated and broken by Spencer's charitable offer to let me file his receipts. I stood on the stairs looking down at the man who had just offered me a minimum wage job out of pity. If they only knew. I flipped the laptop open. The screen remained completely black, waiting for authentication. I typed in the first passphrase, a complex string of 72 characters that I had committed to memory. The system prompted me for a fingerprint scan. I pressed my thumb against the biometric reader hidden near the trackpad. A tiny green light scanned the ridges of my skin. Finally, the camera at the top of the bezel activated, scanning the retinas of my eyes. Authentication confirmed. The screen flared to life, casting a pale blue and green glow across my face in the darkened room. The desktop was sparse, completely devoid of personal files or pictures. There was only a secure terminal window and an encrypted network client. I initiated the connection to the private servers at Apex Partners, routing my signal through multiple secure tunnels to ensure no digital footprint could be traced back to this specific IP address. While the connection established, I listened to the faint sound of music starting up downstairs. They had hired a string quartet for the evening, and the elegant notes of a classical piece were now drifting up the staircase. The contrast was almost poetic. Below me was a scene of opulent, fake aristocratic joy. Above them, sitting in the dark, was their executioner meticulously preparing the instruments of their financial demise. Wealth is a fascinating concept. My mother and sister believed wealth was loud. They thought it was measured by the label on a handbag, the logo on a car, or the exclusivity of a yacht party. They chased the optics of money with a desperate hunger that made them easy to manipulate. But I knew the truth. True wealth is silent. True wealth is data. Wealth is leverage. Wealth is knowing exactly who owes what to whom, and holding the contractual right to call in those debts at any given moment. The terminal window on my screen verified my administrative access. I was logged into the Apex Partners master database. As a senior partner and the lead forensic accountant for the firm, I had unrestricted access to our most sensitive acquisitions. I pulled up the master directory. My eyes scanned the endless rows of data until I found the specific folder I had been building for the past 2 years. The folder was named Operation Buckhead. I clicked into the directory. Inside were hundreds of subfolders representing thousands of hours of meticulous investigation. There were copies of Spencer's offshore bank statements. There were logs of the wire transfers he had diverted from his clients' trust accounts into his personal shell companies. There were copies of Alicia's exorbitant credit card bills, documenting a lifestyle funded entirely by stolen money. And there was the master file containing the deed to this very mansion, along with the paperwork proving that the entire estate had been legally transferred to a holding company under my control. My father, Roland, had known something was wrong before he passed away. He had seen the greed infecting his wife and eldest daughter. He had watched Spencer slither into our family, sensing the rot beneath the expensive suits. My father had come to me, the quiet daughter who understood numbers better than she understood people. He asked me to look into the accounts. What I found had broken his heart, but it had sharpened my resolve. He transferred everything to me in secret, trusting me to act when the time was right. Tonight was the right time. Their demand for $50,000 was the final test. If they had shown a single ounce of humility or grace, I might have given them a warning. I might have tried to mitigate the damage, but they had chosen to humiliate me. They had chosen to banish me from my own home. They had laughed at me and demanded that I kneel. I rested my fingers lightly on the keyboard. The soft hum of the laptop fan was the only sound in my room. I was not a victim running away in the night. I was a predator preparing to sever their lifelines. I watched the cursor blink steadily on the screen, waiting for my command. I was ready to tear down their kingdom of lies brick by expensive brick. The cursor continued to blink in the dark room. I sat perfectly still, listening to the sounds of the house settling as the grandfather clock downstairs chimed 1 in the morning. The string quartet had packed up and left hours ago. The caterers had cleared away the crystal and the silver. The guests had driven their luxury vehicles back to their respective estates, leaving the long curved driveway empty. The mansion was finally wrapped in a thick, heavy silence. I was just about to execute the first sequence of code when I heard a faint metallic scratching at my bedroom door. My fingers paused over the keyboard. The heavy oak door was locked from the inside, but I knew that sound all too well. It was a hairpin scraping against the brass tumblers of the vintage lock. Alicia had learned how to pick these old doors when we were teenagers. She used to break into my room to steal my clothes or read my journals just to have ammunition to use against me at the dinner table. The fact that she was doing it now at 34 years old told me everything I needed to know about her maturity. The lock gave way with a dull click. The door swung inward, casting a long, pale shadow across my floor from the hallway sconces. Alicia stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the doorframe. She was holding a half-empty bottle of expensive champagne by the neck. Her custom white dress was slightly wrinkled now, and her perfect hair was a little messy, but the smug expression on her face was sharper than ever. She stepped into my room uninvited and kicked the door shut behind her. The smell of alcohol and cloying floral perfume instantly invaded my quiet space. She did not bother to turn on the light. She just stood there, swaying slightly, looking down at me sitting at my desk. She thought she was looking at a defeated woman hiding in the dark. She had no idea she had just walked into the center of a trap. "You are still awake," Alicia said, her words slurring just a fraction. I did not answer her. I kept my hands resting flat on my desk, making sure the angle of my body blocked her view of the encrypted laptop screen. My silence seemed to embolden her. She took another step forward, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. "I just wanted to come say goodbye," she said, taking a swig directly from the bottle. "Well, actually, I wanted to come make sure you were actually packing your miserable little bags." She paced slowly around the perimeter of my room, looking at my simple furniture and bare walls with profound disgust. "You never belonged in this house, Maya," she continued. "You always brought down the aesthetic. You drag this dark, depressing energy everywhere you go. Spencer was right about you. You lack vision. You lack class. You are just a bitter little bookkeeper who cannot handle being around exceptional people." I remained completely silent, letting her fill the quiet room with her arrogance. She walked over to my closet and yanked the door open, laughing at the row of plain gray and navy suits. "Tomorrow is going to be the most important day of my life," she announced, spinning around to face me again. "Spencer and I are taking things to the absolute next level. Since you are being permanently evicted tonight, I figured I would let you in on the family secret. Mother has finally agreed to sign over the equity of this entire property. We are mortgaging this massive, outdated museum tomorrow morning." My heart beat a single steady rhythm against my ribs. I watched her face glow with pure greed as she laid out her grand plan. "Spencer needs a massive injection of liquid capital to expand his investment fund," Alicia explained, waving the champagne bottle carelessly. "He is bringing in international clients now. We need to show them that we have massive leveraging power. So Mother is signing the papers at 9 tomorrow. We are pulling every cent of equity out of this estate and dumping it straight into Spencer's portfolio. It is going to make us untouchable. She smiled a wide, predatory smile. And the best part is that it completely erases whatever pathetic legacy our father thought he left behind. Dad always wanted to play it safe. He wanted to keep this house as a historical monument to his boring hard work. But Spencer is going to take Dad's boring money and turn it into an empire with the Blackwood name on it. Dad's legacy is dead, Maya. It is Spencer's house now. I looked at my older sister, processing the sheer magnitude of her delusion. She was bragging about draining her own father's estate to fund the criminal activities of a man who was using her as a shield. She was so blinded by her desire for status that she was actively helping a predator strip her mother of her only home. The cruelty of her plan was only matched by her staggering ignorance. She thought she was a financial mastermind making a strategic play. She did not realize she was digging a grave and bragging about how shiny the shovel was. I knew exactly what Spencer was doing with that investment fund because I had spent the last 2 years tracing every single fraudulent wire transfer he had executed. The international clients Alicia was bragging about did not exist. They were offshore shell companies created to hide the massive losses his reckless trading had incurred. The equity from this house was not going to build an empire. It was going to pay off furious investors who were already threatening legal action. Spencer was executing a classic Ponzi maneuver, and Alicia was eagerly handing him the hammer to smash the family piggy bank. I kept my face completely blank, giving her absolutely nothing to feed on. My lack of a reaction irritated her. She walked directly up to my desk, slamming the champagne bottle down next to my arm. She leaned in close, forcing me to smell the stale alcohol on her breath. Her eyes were hard and completely devoid of any sisterly affection. "You listen to me, you pathetic loser," she hissed. "I want you out of this house before the sun comes up. I want you to pack your cheap trash into your cheap car and drive far away from Buckhead. If you are still here when Spencer and I wake up, I will personally call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Mother already gave the order. You have no legal right to be on this property anymore. You are dead to this family, Maya. Do not ever try to contact us. Do not show up at our events. Do not ever mention my name to anyone you meet. You are a stain on my perfect life, and I am finally scrubbing you out." She stood up straight, adjusting her dress with a triumphant sigh. She looked at me, expecting me to beg. She wanted me to cry and ask where I was supposed to go. She wanted me to ask for just a little more time. She fed on the power of destroying me. I looked up into her eyes. I let the silence stretch for 5 long seconds. I let her feel the weight of my calm stare. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I just absorbed her final vicious threat. I nodded. Alicia blinked clearly, taken aback by my simple, silent agreement. She stared at me for a moment longer, searching my face for any sign of weakness or hidden defiance. Finding none, she let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. She grabbed her champagne bottle off my desk. "Just be gone," she muttered, turning on her heel. She walked back to the door and pulled it open, stepping out into the brightly lit hallway. She did not bother to close the door behind her. She walked down the hall, humming a cheerful tune, completely satisfied that she had crushed me into dust. I waited until I heard her bedroom door shut down the hall. I waited until the house returned to its absolute silence. Then I reached out and quietly pulled my bedroom door shut, locking it once again. I turned my chair back toward the glowing screen of my laptop. Alicia thought she was kicking me out of her house. She did not know that I was the only reason the bank had not already foreclosed on the property. She thought she and Spencer were going to mortgage the estate at 9 in the morning. She did not know that by 9 in the morning, Spencer's accounts would be seized by federal authorities and her credit cards would be completely useless. I placed my fingers back onto the keyboard. The time for observation was officially over. They had made their choices, and they had delivered their final insults. I opened the execution protocol on the Apex Partners Secure Terminal. My sister had ordered me to leave before sunrise. I fully intended to honor that request. But I was not going to leave as a banished victim. I was going to leave as the owner of their entire world. I zipped the suitcase closed and grabbed my car keys from the dresser. I took one last look around the pale blue room that had been my sanctuary and my prison for so many years. The folder sat waiting on the bed, a ticking time bomb wrapped in manila paper. The absolute silence of the house felt different now. It was not the silence of my oppression. It was the deep quiet that always precedes a massive, inescapable storm. I turned off the laptop, letting the room plunge into total darkness, and stepped out into the hallway. I walked softly down the long carpeted hallway, making sure my suitcase wheels did not catch on the thick fabric. The mansion felt cavernous and empty, the shadows stretching long and distorted along the walls. I passed by my mother's master suite where the faint sound of her measured breathing drifted through the heavy wooden door. She was sleeping soundly, resting on a bed of lies she had eagerly swallowed because they tasted like status and prestige. She was dreaming of yacht parties and country club dinners, completely oblivious to the fact that her financial execution had just been finalized by the daughter she despised. I continued past the guest wing where Alicia and Spencer were staying for the weekend. The door was firmly shut, but I could easily imagine them inside. Alicia was probably dreaming of the new designer wardrobe she planned to buy with the mortgage money. Spencer was likely not sleeping at all, staring at the ceiling and sweating as the walls of his Ponzi scheme slowly closed in around him. He knew the feds were circling. He knew his investors were getting angry. He thought tomorrow morning would bring his salvation. He thought stealing an old man's legacy would buy him another year of freedom. I reached the top of the grand mahogany staircase, the exact spot where I had stood just a few hours ago, absorbing their mockery and their laughter. The foyer below was dark, the crystal chandelier hanging silently in the shadows. I lifted my suitcase and carried it down the stairs, my footsteps making no sound. Every step I took felt like a physical detachment from the toxic environment that had suffocated me since childhood. I was leaving behind the unrealistic expectations, the conditional love, and the constant degrading comparisons. I was leaving behind the role of the invisible scapegoat. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked across the cold marble floor toward the front entrance. I did not leave a note. I did not leave a goodbye letter explaining my feelings or demanding an apology. People like Corinne and Alicia do not understand emotional appeals. They view empathy as a weakness to be exploited. The only language they truly understand is the cold, hard reality of consequence. And consequences were exactly what I had left for them on my bed. I reached the heavy oak front door and turned the brass handle, pulling it open to the cool, humid air of the Atlanta night. The crickets were chirping loudly in the manicured bushes lining the driveway. My sensible sedan was parked exactly where I had left it, looking out of place among the luxury vehicles parked near the garage. I walked out into the night, pulling the door shut behind me. It clicked softly, locking automatically. I walked down the driveway, the wheels of my suitcase rumbling quietly against the pavement. I loaded my bag into the trunk of my car and climbed into the driver's seat. I did not look back at the dark, imposing silhouette of the mansion. My work here was done. The digital traps were set, the accounts were frozen, and the legal documents were waiting to be discovered. I started the engine, the quiet hum of the motor breaking the silence of the affluent neighborhood. I put the car in drive and pulled out through the wrought iron gates, heading toward the glowing skyline of downtown Atlanta, where my real life was waiting. I watched the massive wrought iron gates swing shut in my rearview mirror. The heavy metallic clank echoed through the quiet street, sealing the property behind me. I pulled my sensible sedan over to the shoulder of the manicured road and shifted the gear into park. I rolled down the window, letting the cool, humid Atlanta night air fill the cabin. I needed to look back at the estate one last time before the sun came up and changed everything. I turned my head and stared at the towering white columns of the mansion rising against the dark sky. For 31 years I had looked at that house and felt nothing but a crushing sense of inadequacy. It was the place where I was constantly reminded that I was too plain, too quiet, and too boring to fit into my mother's grand vision of high society. It was the fortress where Alicia had reigned supreme, where her beauty and her cruel remarks were celebrated as virtues. But tonight, looking through the dark trees at the sprawling brick facade, I felt absolutely no sadness. There was no nostalgia tugging at my chest. There was no regret for the family bonds that were about to be permanently severed. Instead, I felt the cold, heavy weight of absolute ownership. I was not a banished child running away into the night. I was the landlord stepping off the premises before ordering the demolition. Every brick of that mansion, every blade of grass on the 2-acre lawn, every drop of water in the heated pool legally belonged to me. My father had made sure of it. He had worked his entire life to build a sanctuary for his family, and when he realized his wife and eldest daughter were willing to sell that sanctuary to a con artist, he handed the keys to the only person who could defend it. I pictured the inside of the house remaining perfectly still in the 3 a.m. darkness. I visualized my childhood bedroom on the second floor, the pale blue walls that I had always hated, the simple wooden desk where I had just executed the financial ruin of my arrogant brother-in-law, and right in the center of the perfectly made bed sat the manila folder. I had aligned its edges perfectly parallel to the pillows. The metal USB drive rested squarely on top of the heavy paper, catching the faint moonlight filtering through the window panes. It was a beautiful trap. It was a silent bomb waiting for a tripwire. I knew exactly how the morning would unfold. My mother would wake up early. She would put on her silk robe and walk down the hallway with a smug smile on her face. She would push my bedroom door open, fully expecting to find me sitting on the floor, surrounded by cheap luggage, crying and begging for a second chance. She would have a speech prepared about humility and respect, but she would only find an empty room and that folder. She would walk over to the bed and pick it up. She would see the eviction notice first. She would see the frozen account statements. She would realize that the daughter she had mocked as a low-level bookkeeper was actually the managing director of the firm that held the deed to her entire life. I put the car back in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the neighborhood behind. The streets of Buckhead were completely deserted. I drove past rows of multi-million-dollar homes hidden behind tall hedges and security gates. It was a neighborhood built on the illusion of endless prosperity. But working as a forensic accountant, I knew the ugly truth about these zip codes. I knew how many of these mansions were mortgaged to the hilt. I knew how many luxury cars in these driveways were 3 payments behind. People like Spencer and Alicia lived and died by the perception of wealth. They would happily drown in debt as long as they looked good doing it. My father had hated that culture. He believed in quiet assets. He believed in cash reserves and owning the land beneath your feet. He had tried to teach those lessons to Alicia, but she was too busy listening to our mother talk about country club memberships and designer shoes. They thought my father was boring just like they thought I was boring. They equated flashiness with success. I merged onto the highway heading south toward downtown Atlanta. The glowing skyline rose up in the distance, a cluster of glass and steel piercing the night sky. Somewhere in that dense grid of towers was the headquarters of Apex Partners. That was my real home. That was where I wielded power that Spencer could not even begin to comprehend. I thought about the conversation that was going to happen at 9 in the morning. Spencer would walk into his sleek office downtown preparing to sign the fraudulent mortgage documents. He would be sweating, pouring another cup of coffee, trying to keep his hands from shaking. He would log into his banking portal to check the status of the equity transfer that he desperately needed to pay off his furious investors. And he would find nothing. The accounts would be locked. The transfer would be denied by the holding company. The walls of his Ponzi scheme would instantly collapse inward, crushing him under the weight of federal wire fraud. He would panic. He would call Alicia demanding to know what went wrong with the house. And Alicia would be standing in my empty bedroom, looking at the eviction notice, realizing that her perfect marriage was built on stolen money and that her quiet sister had just seized her entire reality. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline. For years, I had swallowed their insults. I had let them treat me like a servant at family gatherings. I had listened to them praise a criminal while treating my honest work as a joke. But the era of the quiet scapegoat was officially over. I took the exit for the downtown district, navigating the familiar streets until I reached my private residence. It was a luxury penthouse suite that I had purchased entirely with my own bonuses from Apex partners. The building was discreet, heavily secured, and required biometric access to reach the top floor. My mother and sister did not even know this place existed. They thought I lived in a cramped apartment in the suburbs. I pulled into the underground parking garage and parked next to my other car, a custom-imported sports coupe that I drove only on weekends. The sensible sedan I used for family visits was just another piece of my camouflage. I grabbed my rolling suitcase from the trunk and walked to the private elevator. The doors opened directly into my penthouse. The space was vast and modern, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the sleeping city. The lights flickered on automatically as I stepped inside, casting a warm glow over the expensive minimalist furniture and the extensive collection of original artwork on the walls. I left my suitcase by the door and walked over to the massive glass window. I looked out over the city of Atlanta. The sky to the east was just beginning to turn a dark shade of purple, signaling the approaching dawn. It was nearly 4 in the morning. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water, mirroring the exact action I had taken during my banishment just hours ago. But this time, there was no audience. There was no mother screaming at me to kneel. There were no relatives laughing at my expense. There was only the quiet hum of the city below and the absolute certainty of my impending victory. I walked into my master bedroom and set the glass on the nightstand. I opened my closet, revealing rows of razor-sharp designer suits, custom-tailored blouses, and expensive heels. I reached out and selected a striking charcoal gray suit with a subtle crimson pinstripe. It was the suit I wore when I was tearing down corrupt executives in the boardroom. It was my armor. I laid the suit carefully across a chair, making sure it was perfectly prepared for the morning. I needed to look impeccable when Spencer inevitably came crawling to the Apex Partners headquarters to beg for a debt extension. I wanted him to see the senior partner who held his life in her hands before he realized she was also the sister-in-law he had mocked the night before. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling the deep, satisfying exhaustion of a flawlessly executed strategy. The sun was going to rise in just a few hours. The trap I had left on my childhood bed in Buckhead was primed and waiting. The legal documents were unassailable. The digital locks were unbreakable. The criminal referrals were already sitting in the secure inboxes of the federal authorities. I laid my head back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. I did not feel any guilt. I did not feel any obligation to the concept of family loyalty. They had broken that contract long ago. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a small, cold smile. The long night was finally over, and tomorrow was going to be a masterpiece of destruction. The sun rose over the manicured lawns of Buckhead, casting a warm, golden light across the massive windows of the mansion. Downstairs in the sprawling custom kitchen, my mother Corinne was already awake. She was standing by the marble island, pouring herself a cup of imported espresso from the expensive Italian machine she had bought simply because it looked good on the counter. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair perfectly wrapped, and a deeply satisfied smile plastered across her face. Alicia walked into the kitchen a few moments later, yawning and stretching. She was already dressed in designer athleisure wear, preparing for what she assumed would be a busy day of spending other people's money. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, mirroring my mother's smug expression. "Is she gone yet?" Alicia asked, taking a delicate sip from her mug. Corinne let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Please, where would she go? She is probably hiding up in her room right now, terrified to show her face. People like Maya do not have the spine to actually leave. She is weak, Alicia. She has always been weak. I guarantee you by noon she will be downstairs on her hands and knees apologizing and begging us to let her stay. She knows she cannot survive out there without the protection of this family." Alicia nodded in agreement, checking her reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. "Well, Spencer is taking his morning run, and then he has that meeting downtown to finalize the mortgage paperwork. Once that capital clears, I am going straight to the luxury plaza. I need to secure my dress for the yacht gala, and I want to order those custom floral centerpieces before the caterer gets booked up. Spencer said to spare no expense. We need to look like royalty when those international clients arrive. Corinne beamed with pride, looking at her eldest daughter like she was the greatest achievement of her life. That is exactly how you handle wealth, my dear. You project absolute dominance. Let Maya sit up there and wallow in her pathetic little life. We have an empire to expand. In fact, I think it is time I go up there and give her a final warning. If she wants to sleep under my roof, she needs to understand exactly who is in charge. My mother set her espresso cup down on the marble counter with a sharp clink. She tightened the belt of her silk robe and marched out of the kitchen, heading straight for the grand staircase. She was practically vibrating with the anticipation of delivering another crushing blow to my self-esteem. She walked down the upstairs hallway, her bare feet making no sound on the thick carpet. She reached my bedroom door and did not bother to knock. She simply turned the handle and shoved the heavy oak door open, causing it to bounce slightly against the wall. "Get up, Maya," she barked, stepping into the room. "Playtime is over and I want to see you down in the foyer right now." But the room was completely silent. Corinne stopped in her tracks, her eyes sweeping across the space. The bed was perfectly made, not a single wrinkle in the pale blue duvet. The air felt stale and empty. She walked over to the closet and yanked the door open. The hangers were bare. My cheap gray suits and sensible shoes were entirely gone. There was no trace of me left in the room. Alicia had followed her up the stairs holding her coffee mug. She peeked her head around the doorframe. "Did she actually leave?" Alicia asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Corinne frowned, her perfect morning suddenly interrupted by a script she had not written. She must have snuck out in the middle of the night like a coward. She is probably sleeping in her car in some cheap motel parking lot. It was then that my mother noticed the only thing left in the room. Sitting dead center on the perfectly made bed was the thick manila folder. The metal USB drive rested squarely on top of it, catching the morning light filtering through the window. Corinne walked over to the bed, her brow furrowed in confusion. She picked up the metal drive, inspecting it for a moment, before tossing it carelessly onto the nightstand. Then she picked up the folder. "What is it?" Alicia asked, stepping into the room. "I do not know," Corinne muttered, flipping the cover open. "Probably a pathetic apology letter or some dramatic diary entry about how unfair we are." But it was not a diary entry. Corinne stared at the first page of the stack. It was the formal notice of eviction. The header clearly stated the name of the holding company, Horizon Vanguard. Her eyes scanned down the page, reading the legal jargon demanding the immediate vacation of the premises by all unauthorized occupants, including Corinne and Alicia. The document explicitly stated that their residency had been terminated effectively immediately. Corinne let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "She is out of her mind. She actually printed out a fake eviction notice." "Let me see that," Alicia said, setting her coffee down and snatching the paper from my mother's hands. She read the document, her eyes skimming over the official seals and the signature at the bottom. Maya signed this as the managing director of Horizon Vanguard. What is Horizon Vanguard? It is some imaginary company she made up. Corinne scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. She is throwing a tantrum. She probably used the printers at her boring accounting firm to make these up just to scare us. She thinks because she works with spreadsheets, she can draft legal documents. It is pathetic, really. Corinne reached into the folder and pulled out the next stack of papers. These were the termination notices for the 3 platinum credit accounts. They clearly showed the frozen status, the 0 available balances, and the immediate cancellation of all privileges. Again, my mother just laughed, shaking her head at what she perceived to be my desperate attempt at a prank. "She is absolutely delusional," Corinne said, tossing the papers back onto the bed. "She really thinks she can freeze my credit cards. My name is on those accounts. My husband built this estate. She is just trying to ruin our morning because she is jealous that Spencer is securing that massive commercial loan today." Alicia laughed, tossing the fake eviction notice next to the credit card statements. Honestly, it is kind of sad. She is 31 years old and she is leaving fake legal threats on her bed like a teenager. Whatever. I am not letting her ruin my mood. I have an appointment at the boutique in an hour, and I need to make the deposit for the yacht rental before noon. Alicia reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, intending to text her personal shopper to confirm her arrival time. As she unlocked the screen, a notification banner dropped down from the top of the display. It was an automated text message from her bank. She tapped the notification, her smile faltering slightly as she read the message. She read it again, her eyes narrowing in confusion. "What is it?" Corinne asked, noticing the sudden shift in her daughter's demeanor. Alicia stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the glass. "I just got an alert from my Platinum card. It says my card was declined for the recurring charge on my gym membership." Corinne rolled her eyes. "It is just a bank error, Alicia. The system probably flagged it as suspicious. Just call them and authorize it. You have a $50,000 limit on that card." Alicia quickly opened her mobile banking application, her perfectly manicured fingernail tapping rapidly against the screen. The app loaded slowly, the little loading circles spinning for what felt like an eternity. When the dashboard finally appeared, the color completely drained from Alicia's face. She stopped breathing. The hand holding the phone began to tremble slightly. Mom, Alicia whispered, her voice suddenly thin and hollow. "What is it?" Corinne asked, stepping closer, her own confidence beginning to crack at the edges. Alicia turned the phone screen toward our mother. The Platinum account balance was displayed in stark red numbers. But it was not the balance that made Corinne's stomach drop into her shoes. It was the bold red text sitting right above the account number. "Account frozen. Authorized user privileges revoked by primary account holder. Available credit $0." Corinne stared at the glowing screen, unable to process the words. She quickly pulled her own phone from the pocket of her silk robe and opened her banking app. The loading screen spun. The dashboard appeared. Her account showed the exact same red text. Frozen. Revoked. $0. They both slowly turned their heads to look at the manila folder, resting innocently on the pale blue duvet. The fake legal papers suddenly did not look so fake anymore. The heavy silence of the empty bedroom pressed down on them as the delusion of their victory shattered, leaving them standing in the cold, terrifying reality of their sudden, absolute ruin. The heavy silence of the bedroom was suddenly shattered by the aggressive screech of tires tearing across the pristine driveway outside. Corinne and Alicia jumped, both rushing to the large bay window that overlooked the front of the estate. A black luxury sedan had just violently mounted the curb, crushing a bed of imported hydrangeas before slamming to a halt right in front of the marble steps. The driver's side door flew open, and Mr. Caldwell, the longtime family attorney, practically fell out of the vehicle. Caldwell was a man who usually moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a wealthy Southern lawyer. He was known for his impeccably tailored suits and his calm demeanor. But right now, he looked like a man who was actively having a heart attack. His tie was undone. His suit jacket was missing, and his shirt was drenched in sweat. He grabbed a thick leather briefcase from the passenger seat, his hands shaking so violently that he dropped a stack of papers right onto the wet pavement. He did not even stop to pick them up. He just scrambled up the marble steps and began pounding on the heavy oak front door with both fists. Corinne quickly smoothed the front of her silk robe, forcing her face back into a mask of arrogant composure. She looked at Alicia, who was still clutching her phone with the frozen bank screen. "Put that away," Corinne hissed, snatching the phone from her daughter's hand. "It is just a bank glitch. Caldwell is probably just here to finalize the mortgage paperwork for Spencer. He always gets nervous when large sums of capital are being moved. Let me handle this. Just smile and remember who we are." They walked out of the bedroom and descended the grand staircase. The pounding on the door grew louder and more frantic, echoing through the massive foyer. Corinne walked with slow, deliberate steps, projecting the image of a perfectly unbothered Buckhead matriarch. She reached the door and pulled it open, putting on a condescending smile. "Really, Caldwell," Corinne said smoothly, crossing her arms, pounding on the door like a common delivery driver at this hour. "You are making a scene for the neighbors." Caldwell pushed past her, completely ignoring all boundaries of upper-class etiquette. He stumbled into the foyer, gasping for air, his chest heaving as he dropped his heavy briefcase onto the polished marble floor. He leaned over, resting his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. "Madam," he gasped, looking up at Corinne. "What have you done? What did you do to Maya?" Corinne let out a soft, elegant laugh, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, please do not tell me Maya called you crying. I simply instituted some discipline in this house. Maya was being disrespectful to Alicia and Spencer, so I told her to pack her bags. She needs to learn that her low-level bookkeeping salary does not give her the right to dictate how this family operates." Alicia stepped up next to our mother, nodding proudly. "Exactly. She was bringing down the entire energy of the house. We are elevating our brand Caldwell. Spencer is bringing in international investors, and we cannot have my bitter plain sister dragging down our social standing." Corinne stepped forward, looking down at the sweating lawyer. "You need to calm down, Caldwell. You are acting hysterical over a family spat. In fact, your timing is perfect. Spencer is going to be leaving for his downtown meeting soon, and we need you to prep the transfer of the estate deeds. We have decided that it is time to move on from Roland's outdated financial strategy. Spencer is going to leverage the equity of this house to expand his investment fund. He is a financial visionary, and it is time the men in the family took over the heavy lifting. So pull yourself together and get the mortgage paperwork ready. Spencer is taking over the assets today." Caldwell slowly stood up straight. He looked at Corinne and Alicia as if they had just spoken to him in an alien language. A sound escaped his throat that was halfway between a sob and a hysterical laugh. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand, staring at the two women who were completely blinded by their own arrogance. "Spencer is taking over the assets," Caldwell repeated, his voice cracking. "You want to leverage the equity for Spencer?" "Yes." Corinne smiled, her chin raised high. "We are putting everything under his control. He understands how real money works." Caldwell suddenly screamed, his voice echoing violently off the high ceilings and crystal chandelier. "You have no assets!" The smile vanished from Corinne's face. Alicia took a step back, startled by the raw volume of his voice. "What are you talking about?" Corinne snapped, her fake, polite tone entirely gone. "Roland left this house to me. He left the pensions and the bank accounts to me. I am the matriarch of this family." Caldwell grabbed his leather briefcase and ripped it open, pulling out thick stacks of legal documents sealed with heavy red stamps. He threw them onto the marble foyer table, pointing at them with a shaking finger. "Roland did not leave you a single dime!" Caldwell yelled, his face turning red. "Roland knew Spencer was a fraud 2 years ago. He knew you and Alicia were going to bankrupt this family trying to impress the country club. 2 weeks before he died, Roland established an irrevocable blind trust and transferred the deed to this house, the pensions, the investments, every single asset into a holding company called Horizon Vanguard." Corinne's eyes widened as she recognized the name from the fake eviction notice upstairs. "I have been bound by attorney-client privilege," Caldwell continued, his voice shaking with panic. "I was legally forbidden from telling you until the execution order was triggered. And at 3 o'clock this morning, the managing director of Horizon Vanguard triggered the total asset freeze. You do not own this house, Corinne. You do not own the cars in the driveway. You do not even own the designer clothes in your closet. Everything belongs to the holding company." Alicia stepped forward, her voice shrill and panicked. "That is impossible. Who is the managing director? Who is in charge of this Vanguard company?" Caldwell looked at Alicia, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief at her stupidity. "It is Maya. Maya is the sole managing director of Horizon Vanguard." Corinne let out a harsh, breathless laugh, shaking her head. "Maya. Maya is a filing clerk. She does not know anything about running a holding company." You are lying, Caldwell. You are trying to steal from us. Caldwell grabbed another document from the pile and shoved it toward Corinne's chest. Maya is not a filing clerk, you absolute fool. She is a senior partner and the lead forensic accountant for Apex Partners. Do you know what Apex Partners is, Corinne? They are the most ruthless private equity firm in the state. They buy up bad debt and they crush corporations. Maya has been running your finances for 2 years. She was the one paying your credit card bills. She was the one paying the property taxes. She allowed you to live here out of the goodness of her heart. Alicia grabbed her mother's arm, her voice trembling. The credit cards, Mom. The text message I got upstairs. It said the authorized user privileges were revoked. Yes, Caldwell shouted. Because she froze your accounts. She terminated your residency. You are technically squatting on property owned by Apex Partners. Corinne stumbled back, her legs suddenly giving way. She bumped into the foyer table, sending a crystal vase crashing to the marble floor where it shattered into 100 pieces. Her mind was spinning, trying to process the absolute destruction of her reality. The quiet, boring daughter she had banished, the girl she had mocked and humiliated in front of 27 relatives, was not a failure. She was a corporate predator who had been holding their entire existence in the palm of her hand. Caldwell was not finished. He looked down at the shattered crystal on the floor, and then looked back up at Corinne and Alicia, his eyes wide with a new, much darker panic. And that is not even the worst part, Caldwell whispered, his voice dropping to a terrified rasp. Spencer's fund is a Ponzi scheme. He has been embezzling millions of dollars from investors. And Apex Partners, the firm your daughter controls, just bought all of his debt. Spencer does not have a meeting downtown to secure a mortgage. He is walking into an ambush. Your son-in-law is completely bankrupt and Maya is the one holding the hammer. The grand foyer of the Buckhead mansion fell into a deafening silence, broken only by the sound of Alicia letting out a soft, terrified whimper. The delusion of their high society victory had been entirely ripped away, exposing the cold, hard floor of their absolute ruin. Alicia slumped against the mahogany staircase, her legs unable to support the weight of her designer dress, or the crushing reality of what Caldwell had just said. Corinne remained frozen, staring at the shattered crystal at her feet, as if trying to piece together the fragments of her destroyed social standing. The grand foyer of the Buckhead mansion felt incredibly cold, despite the warm morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Caldwell reached into his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound document, sealed with heavy blue wax and signed in multiple places. He slapped it onto the foyer table, right next to the eviction notice Maya had left behind. "This is Roland's final legally binding will and testament," he said, his voice hoarse and ragged from yelling. "Your late husband knew exactly what was happening in this house, Corinne. He was a brilliant man who built his wealth with his own 2 hands. He saw Spencer bleeding his investors dry, and he saw you eagerly holding the cup to catch the overflow just to impress your friends at the country club. So Roland structured a titanium vault around the family assets, and he handed the only key to Maya. He opened the heavy document, flipping past pages of complex legal jargon to the heavily notarized signature pages at the back. He pointed a trembling finger at a specific paragraph highlighted in bold ink. It explicitly grants Maya absolute and irrevocable power of attorney over every single asset, liability, and corporate entity associated with the family name. You cannot contest it. You cannot appeal it. Roland included a specific poison pill clause stating that any attempt by you or Alicia to challenge the trust in court would automatically trigger a full federal audit of your personal finances. And considering you have been living off stolen money for the last 2 years, an audit is the absolute last thing you want. Alicia shook her head violently, tears of genuine panic streaming down her face and ruining her flawless makeup. No, Spencer is a genius," she sobbed, her voice high and desperate. "He manages portfolios for international clients. He just bought me a diamond necklace yesterday. He showed me the bank statements. He has millions in liquid capital. We are supposed to be renting a yacht next week." "He has absolutely nothing," Alicia Caldwell barked, lacking any of his usual polite Southern restraint. The international clients do not exist. They are ghost accounts created to shuffle money around so he could pay off his early investors. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme, and it collapsed 3 days ago. Spencer has been under secret investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for 6 months. He thought he was outsmarting the federal regulators, but he was leaving a digital trail a mile wide. Do you want to know where your designer clothes and your luxury vacations really came from, Alicia? He stole the retirement savings of the elderly couples from your mother's own church congregation. He preyed on your community to fund your fake black excellence lifestyle. Corinne leaned back against the wall, her hand clutching her chest as she gasped for air. Then how did he plan to get the mortgage today? She whispered, her voice barely audible. He said the bank was ready to transfer $5 million to his commercial account this morning. He promised me it would double our net worth. Because he forged the financial statements, Caldwell explained, wiping the cold sweat from his brow. He used your name, Corinne, as the primary guarantor on a fraudulent loan application, using a house you do not even own as collateral. He was desperate. He needed that $5 million to cover the massive deficit in his main fund before the federal agents kicked his office door down. But the bank rejected the wire transfer at 3 a.m. because the real owner of the property intervened with a legally binding injunction. Maya did not just freeze your credit cards. Alicia Caldwell continued, his tone dripping with grim finality. She engineered a corporate slaughter. Apex Partners specializes in buying distressed and toxic debt. When Spencer's fund began to implode a few weeks ago, his creditors panicked. They wanted to offload his toxic liabilities for pennies on the dollar just to salvage something before the feds froze everything. Maya used the massive corporate resources of Apex to quietly buy up every single promissory note, every defaulted loan, and every margin call attached to Spencer's name. Alicia let out a choked gasp, clutching her stomach as if she had been physically struck. "What does that mean?" she cried, rocking back and forth on the stairs. "It means your sister owns your husband," Caldwell stated flatly. Apex Partners is now his sole primary creditor. They hold his corporate notes, his personal guarantees, and the collateral on his firm. He is entirely, totally, and completely bankrupt. He owes Maya tens of millions of dollars that he does not have and can never repay. And because he committed federal wire fraud to get that money, she is not just going to seize his business. She is legally obligated to hand his master files over to the authorities. Corinne sank down onto the bottom step of the staircase next to her weeping daughter, her expensive silk robe pooling around her bare feet. The sheer magnitude of the disaster was paralyzing. She had spent her entire adult life curating an image of untouchable Buckhead royalty. She had cast out her youngest daughter just hours ago, believing she was removing a humiliating stain from her perfect, aristocratic tapestry. She had forced her to leave in the dead of night to protect a man who was actively destroying them. Instead, she had banished the only person who had been keeping her out of federal prison. "We have to call him," Alicia panicked, scrambling for her phone, which still displayed the frozen bank account alert. "I have to warn him. We have to run. We can pack the cars and leave the state before the police get to his office." "You cannot warn him," Caldwell said, shaking his head pitifully. "Do you think a senior partner at an Apex firm leaves loose ends?" Maya disconnected Spencer's cell service an hour ago through the corporate telecommunications plan she controls. He is walking into the Apex building right now, completely blind, thinking he is sitting down for a routine debt restructuring negotiation with anonymous executives. He thinks he is going to charm his way out of bankruptcy. He is going to walk into that glass boardroom and see the sister-in-law he mocked last night sitting at the head of the table. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the foyer again. The reality was absolute. There was no loophole. There was no social connection or country club favor that could save them from the crushing weight of federal fraud and total financial annihilation. "You have exactly 2 hours to pack your personal belongings," Caldwell said, his voice dropping to a quiet, professional monotone. "Maya was generous enough to authorize a moving truck for your clothes and basic personal items, but you cannot take any art, any furniture, or anything of significant monetary value from this house. The private security team from Horizon Vanguard will be here at 9 sharp to formally secure the premises and change all the locks. Corinne looked up, her eyes vacant and terrified. "Where are we supposed to go?" "Caldwell," she whispered, her arrogant facade completely stripped away, leaving only a broken, hollow woman. "My credit cards are frozen. We do not have a single dollar in cash." Caldwell picked up his briefcase, his hands finally steady as the adrenaline faded into bleak resignation. "I suggest you start calling those 27 relatives you entertained last night, Corinne. Let us see how many of your elite society friends are willing to take in a bankrupt family linked to a federal Ponzi scheme that stole from their own community." He turned and walked out the heavy oak door, leaving it wide open behind him. The humid Atlanta morning air drifted into the foyer, sweeping over the shattered crystal on the marble floor. Alicia sat on the stairs, weeping uncontrollably into her hands, mourning the death of her high society illusion. Corinne just stared out the open door at the empty driveway, realizing that her empire of lies had finally burned to the ground, and she was left standing in the bitter ashes. Alicia stared at the open doorway, the humid morning air doing nothing to dry the tears ruining her makeup. "No," she whispered, shaking her head so hard her perfect hair began to unravel. "No, Caldwell is lying. He has to be lying. Maya is just a clerk. She does not have the brains to pull off a hostile takeover." Corinne suddenly snapped out of her paralyzed state. Her survival instinct kicking in, she replaced her terror with pure, unadulterated rage. She grabbed Alicia's arm, pulling her up from the stairs. "Get up!" Alicia Corinne snapped, her voice trembling but fierce. "We are not sitting here crying over a prank. Maya is playing games with us. She probably hired Caldwell to scare us because she was humiliated last night. I am her mother. I brought her into this world, and I can absolutely destroy her. Call her right now." Alicia fumbled with her phone, her fingers slipping on the glass screen. She dialed Maya's number, pressing the phone tightly against her ear. Corinne paced the marble foyer, her silk robe swishing around her ankles. She was already preparing the vicious speech she would deliver the moment Maya answered. She would threaten to call the police. She would threaten to ruin Maya's pathetic little career. But Alicia slowly lowered the phone from her ear. Her face was completely blank. It went straight to a disconnected message. Alicia said, her voice trembling again. "She blocked me, Mom. She actually blocked my number. Give me that." Corinne snatched her own phone and dialed. She waited for a few seconds before ripping the phone away from her ear with a frustrated scream. Disconnected. She completely shut off our access to her. Corinne threw her phone onto the foyer table, the device skidding across the polished wood and knocking over a silver picture frame. The glass cracked, but she did not even blink. She refused to accept that her quiet, plain daughter had outsmarted her. In Corinne's mind, she was still the queen of Buckhead, and Maya was just a rebellious peasant who needed to be brought to heel. "We know where her cheap little accounting firm is," Corinne declared, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "She works in that boring gray building in Midtown. We are going down there right now. I will walk right past her receptionist and drag her out of her cubicle by her hair if I have to. She is going to sign a document transferring the deed back to me today, or I will make a scene so massive she will never work in this city again." Just as Corinne turned toward the hallway, the heavy wooden door leading from the garage suddenly slammed open. Spencer stumbled into the hallway, looking absolutely nothing like the arrogant investment director who had mocked Maya the night before. He was wearing his expensive running gear, but he was not sweating from exercise. He was sweating from pure, unfiltered panic. His chest was heaving and his face was a sickly shade of gray. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Alicia rushed toward him, expecting comfort. "Spencer! Thank God you are back!" Alicia cried, reaching for his arm. "Caldwell was just here spouting insane lies about Maya taking over the house and freezing our accounts. My credit card was declined this morning. We need you to fix this." Spencer did not even look at her. He pushed past Alicia, stumbling toward the kitchen island. He grabbed a glass, knocking it against the marble countertop before filling it with tap water. His hands were shaking so violently that half the water spilled down his chin and onto his designer athletic shirt. "My phone is dead," Spencer gasped, his voice a high-pitched wheeze. "I went to get a coffee after my run, and my corporate card declined. My personal card declined. I tried to call my broker, and my cell service said the account was suspended." "What the hell is happening, Corinne?" Corinne marched into the kitchen, her patience completely exhausted. "What is happening is that my ungrateful daughter is throwing a tantrum," Corinne snapped. "She somehow managed to block our accounts and convinced Caldwell to play along with some fake trust document. But we are not going to stand here and panic. You are going to go upstairs, put on your suit, and drive us to her office right now." Spencer stared at Corinne, his eyes darting around the room wildly. "Her office? Why would we go to her office? I have a massive debt restructuring meeting downtown in an hour. I have investors threatening to sue me, Corinne. I need the mortgage on this house approved today, or I am going to prison. Do you understand me? I am going to federal prison." Alicia's eyes widened as the reality of Caldwell's warning began to sink in. "Spencer? What do you mean prison?" she whispered, stepping back from him. "Caldwell said you were running a Ponzi scheme. He said you were stealing." Spencer slammed his empty glass onto the counter. "Shut up, Alicia," he yelled, spittle flying from his lips. "You do not know anything about finance. I am managing cash flow. It is a temporary deficit. Once I secure the equity from this estate, I can balance the books and the feds will have nothing on me. But I need that money now." "Then you will drive us to Maya's office," Corinne demanded, pointing a finger at his chest. "You think you are stressed, Spencer. Try waking up to an eviction notice from your own daughter. Maya is the one blocking the mortgage transfer. She thinks she is running some holding company called Horizon Vanguard. We are going to go down to her little cubicle and physically force her to sign the release forms. Once she drops this ridiculous injunction, you can have your precious mortgage and pay off your clients." Spencer blinked, the name Horizon Vanguard echoing in his panicked mind. He had seen that name on legal documents his broker had warned him about weeks ago. A predatory firm had been quietly buying up his bad debt. He had assumed it was a faceless corporate entity. He had never in a million years imagined it was connected to the quiet sister-in-law he constantly belittled. Spencer rubbed his face roughly, his breathing ragged. "Fine," he muttered, his voice shaking. "Fine. Get your bags. We will go to her office. I will intimidate her into signing whatever you need. She is just a weak little bookkeeper. She will crack if I put enough pressure on her. I just need her to release the house so I can make my downtown meeting." Alicia ran upstairs to change out of her pajamas, while Corinne went to the garage to retrieve the keys to her luxury SUV. She refused to drive Spencer's leased sports car, which she now suspected was probably days away from being repossessed. 10 minutes later, the three of them piled into the heavy leather seats of the SUV. Spencer took the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were completely white. The drive toward downtown Atlanta was agonizingly tense. The morning rush hour traffic forced them to sit in gridlock while their entire world was burning down around them. Inside the car, the atmosphere was toxic. Alicia sat in the passenger seat, frantically scrolling through social media, terrified that someone from her elite sorority had already heard a rumor about their financial collapse. Corinne sat in the back seat, glaring out the window, rehearsing the vicious insults she planned to hurl at Maya. She was completely blinded by her own maternal entitlement, believing that no amount of legal paperwork could overcome a mother's rage. Spencer was muttering to himself, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, as if he expected federal agents to be tailing them. He was sweating profusely, the air conditioning in the luxury vehicle doing nothing to cool his rising panic. He kept telling himself that Maya was nobody. She was just a plain, quiet woman who wore cheap suits. She could not possibly be the mastermind behind his destruction. He convinced himself that she had just stumbled onto a legal loophole and that his aggressive corporate presence would easily bully her into submission. They navigated the busy streets, moving closer to the address Corinne had saved in her phone years ago. They still believed they were driving to a mediocre accounting firm in a strip mall. They still thought they were going to march into a depressing lobby, demand to see their daughter, and drag her out by her ear. They were completely consumed by their delusion of superiority. They had no idea they were driving straight toward a massive glass and steel skyscraper. They had no idea they were about to walk into the absolute center of Maya's corporate empire, and that the slaughterhouse doors were already wide open, waiting for them to step inside. Corinne guided her heavy luxury SUV through the congested downtown streets. She was expecting to pull into a drab suburban strip mall with fading paint and a cracked parking lot. She followed the navigation voice on her phone right into the heart of the financial district. The towering structures of glass and steel blocked out the morning sun, casting long, imposing shadows over the busy sidewalks. Corinne pulled up to the curb in front of a massive 70-story skyscraper. The sleek facade of the building reflected the clouds above. Engraved into the thick marble slab near the revolving glass doors was the name Apex Partners. Alicia stared out the passenger window, her mouth hanging slightly open. "This cannot be right," Alicia muttered, looking down at the address on her mother's phone. "She works in a cubicle. This building belongs to a private equity firm." Spencer killed the engine, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. His face had drained of all color. He recognized the address immediately. This was the exact address his broker had sent him. The address where his desperate debt restructuring meeting was scheduled to take place in less than 45 minutes. His heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. They climbed out of the SUV, handing the keys to a valet who looked at their panicked expressions with polite indifference. Corinne marched forward, leading the charge through the revolving glass doors. She was determined to maintain her delusion. She convinced herself that Maya simply worked in the basement of this impressive building, sorting mail for the executives upstairs. The lobby was cavernous and intimidating, featuring polished concrete floors, minimalist modern art, and a massive reception desk manned by 3 security guards in immaculate dark suits. Corinne walked right up to the desk, tapping her manicured fingernails against the glass counter. "I am here to see my daughter, Corinne," demanded, her voice dripping with unearned authority. "Her name is Maya. She is an accountant here. Just call her down and tell her her mother is waiting in the lobby, and she better not keep me waiting." The head security guard, a tall, imposing man with a stern face, did not even blink. He looked at the 3 of them, assessing their disheveled appearances and their aggressive posture. He typed something into his terminal. "We do not have a low-level accountant named Maya," he stated flatly. "This is a secure corporate facility, ma'am. If you do not have an appointment, I am going to have to ask you to step aside." Corinne scoffed, placing her hands on her hips. "Do you know who I am?" She snapped, her Buckhead entitlement flaring up. "My daughter works here. She handles spreadsheets. She probably just transferred to this building. Find her right now." Alicia stepped up next to our mother, her voice shrill and demanding. "Look, we do not have time for this. Just let us through the gates. We know she is hiding in there." The security guard signaled to his colleagues, who immediately stepped out from behind the desk, blocking the path to the elevator banks. "I will not ask you again," the guard warned, his hand resting near the radio on his belt. "Step back toward the doors, or you will be physically removed for trespassing." Spencer pushed his way to the front, his panic finally boiling over into pure desperation. He grabbed the edge of the reception desk, leaning heavily against it. His designer athletic wear was soaked in sweat. "Please, you have to let me up," Spencer begged, his voice cracking. "I am not here for an accountant. I have a meeting. I am Spencer. I am the director of a major investment fund. I am scheduled to meet with the senior partners of the firm in 30 minutes to discuss a crucial debt extension." The receptionist sitting next to the security guard typed his name into the tablet. She looked up at Spencer, her expression completely devoid of sympathy. "Yes, Spencer," she said coldly. You are scheduled for a disciplinary restructuring meeting with the senior partners regarding your defaulted accounts. However, your access is restricted until the executive committee is ready for you. You cannot go up to the executive floors without an escort. Please take a seat in the waiting area. Corinne and Alicia stared at Spencer in absolute shock. The confident, wealthy investment director who had mocked Maya the night before was currently begging a receptionist for mercy. He was pleading for a debt extension to save him from bankruptcy right in the middle of a crowded corporate lobby. Alicia grabbed his arm, her voice a frantic whisper. "Spencer, what are you doing? What debt extension? You told me you were getting a $5 million mortgage today. You said you were expanding the fund to international clients." Spencer shook her off, completely broken by the reality of his situation. "There is no mortgage, Alicia," he hissed, his eyes darting around the lobby in pure terror. "The bank rejected the application because Maya froze the estate. Apex Partners bought all my debt. They hold my entire fund in their hands. If I do not get upstairs and beg the senior partners for leniency, today I am going to lose everything. I am going to federal prison. Alicia. They have my records. They know about the offshore accounts." Corinne's face flushed red with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. She looked around the sleek, intimidating lobby, realizing how completely out of her depth she was. This was not a place where angry mothers could throw tantrums and demand compliance. This was a fortress of corporate power. And yet her mind still refused to make the final connection. She still could not fathom that the quiet daughter she had bullied for 31 years was the predator sitting at the top of this very building. She turned back to the security guard, slamming her hand on the desk. "I demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this firm," Corinne screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "I want to speak to the senior partners who are handling this meeting right now. I will not be treated like some common beggar in the street." The security guards exchanged a tired glance. They dealt with arrogant people every single day, but the sheer delusion radiating from my mother was almost pathetic. They moved closer, forming a solid wall of dark suits between my family and the elevators. "Mom, if you raise your voice one more time, we will forcibly remove you from the premises," the head guard stated, his tone absolute. Spencer pulled at Corinne's arm, his eyes wide with fear. "Stop it!" he begged, his voice cracking. "Do not make them angry. You do not understand who these people are. Apex Partners destroys corporations for fun. If you make a scene, they will liquidate my entire life before lunch. Please just sit down and let me handle the negotiation. I just need 10 minutes with the senior partners. I can charm them. I can explain the cash flow issues. I just need a little more time to balance the books." Alicia buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the perfect facade of her marriage crumbled in front of strangers. She had spent years looking down on everyone who did not meet her financial standards, and now she was standing in a lobby watching her husband grovel for his freedom. The wealthy, aristocratic image she had carefully curated in Buckhead was completely obliterated, leaving nothing but a desperate, terrified woman in wrinkled designer clothes. Upstairs in my corner office, I watched the entire pathetic display on the high-definition security feeds. I sat in my leather chair, sipping my morning coffee and watching my family humiliate themselves in real time. They were trapped in the lobby exactly where I wanted them. They had walked right into the lion's den, completely blind to the fact that the lion was the same woman they had banished from their home just a few hours ago. I smiled, finishing my coffee. It was time to go downstairs and start the meeting. I adjusted the cuffs of my tailored charcoal suit and stood up from my desk. The screens on my wall displayed multiple angles of their panic. Spencer was pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath, wiping sweat from his forehead. Corinne was glaring at the security guards, crossing her arms in a futile display of dominance. Alicia was leaning against a marble pillar, crying quietly into a tissue. They looked so small and powerless, surrounded by the cold architecture of my empire. I walked out of my office and signaled to my CEO, who was waiting in the hallway. We stepped into the private executive elevator together, watching the floor numbers tick down toward the lobby. My family wanted to speak to the senior partners. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. The soft chime of the private executive elevator echoed across the vast expanse of the lobby. The heavy brushed steel doors glided open, revealing the bright fluorescent lights of the corporate interior. I stepped out onto the polished concrete floor. My charcoal gray suit with the subtle crimson pinstripe fit perfectly, projecting an aura of absolute authority. The fabric moved silently as I walked. Beside me walked Marcus, the chief executive officer of Apex Partners. He was a tall, imposing man who rarely came down to the lobby, but he insisted on being present to witness the conclusion of this particular audit. We walked together, moving in perfect synchronization. The sound of our shoes clicking against the hard floor cut through the chaotic noise of my family arguing with the security guards. The head security guard saw us approaching. He immediately stopped speaking to my mother and took a respectful step backward. He lowered his head slightly, acknowledging our presence. The sudden shift in his demeanor caught my mother's attention. She stopped her frantic yelling and turned around, expecting to see a team of anonymous corporate executives arriving to listen to her demands. She had her shoulders pulled back and her chin raised high, ready to deliver a speech about her social standing in Buckhead. She looked directly at me. Her eyes scanned my tailored suit, my perfectly styled hair, and my calm expression. For a fraction of a second, her brain simply refused to process the visual information. She saw a powerful senior partner walking out of a restricted executive elevator. She did not immediately register that the powerful senior partner was the same daughter she had banished from her home just a few hours earlier. Then the reality slowly clicked into place. I watched the exact moment the delusion shattered. Corinne's eyes widened so far they almost popped out of her head. Her jaw went slack, falling open in a grotesque display of absolute shock. All the color violently drained from her face, leaving her looking like a pale ghost wrapped in expensive silk. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to reach out and grab the edge of the marble reception desk just to keep herself from collapsing onto the floor. Alicia followed our mother's gaze. She turned around, her face still stained with running makeup and dried tears. She stared at me walking across the lobby. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. She looked at my expensive suit and then looked down at her own wrinkled designer athletic wear. The quiet, plain sister she had bullied and mocked her entire life was currently flanked by a billionaire executive and guarded by a team of security personnel. The hierarchy she had built her entire identity around was completely obliterated in the span of 5 seconds. Alicia could not speak. She could not even breathe. She just stood there, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her miscalculation. But Spencer's reaction was the most satisfying of all. He was leaning heavily against a marble pillar, wiping a continuous stream of sweat from his forehead. He turned to see who was approaching, hoping it was the financial saviors he desperately needed. His bloodshot blue eyes locked onto mine. He recognized me instantly. But he did not see the quiet sister-in-law who sat silently at family dinners. He saw the predator who had systematically dismantled his entire life over the past 2 years. He saw the forensic accountant who had tracked every single stolen dollar, every offshore shell company, and every forged document. He realized in that exact moment that the massive holding company that had bought his toxic debt was not a faceless entity. It was me. I stopped walking when I was exactly 10 feet away from them. Marcus stopped beside me, crossing his arms and watching the pathetic display with cold, professional interest. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I maintained the exact same blank expression I had worn when they ordered me to kneel on their foyer floor. The silence in the massive lobby was deafening. The air conditioning hummed quietly above us. My family stared at me like I was a creature from another dimension. They were completely trapped in the terrifying reality of their own making. "You are late for your debt restructuring meeting." "Spencer," I said. My voice was calm and even, echoing perfectly in the quiet space. Spencer let out a choked, gasping sound. He stumbled forward, taking a weak step toward me before stopping. He looked at Marcus, and then looked back at me, his mind fracturing under the weight of his total financial ruin. "Maya?" He whispered, his voice breaking into a pathetic squeak. You are Horizon Vanguard. You bought the debt. You are the senior partner. I did not confirm his statements because they did not require confirmation. The reality was standing right in front of him. I simply looked down at him, watching the arrogant facade melt away to reveal the desperate criminal hiding underneath. Last night, you told me I lacked vision, Spencer. I continued, my tone conversational but deadly. You told me I operated in a world of pennies and spreadsheets. You offered me a minimum wage job in your basement archives out of pity. But you failed to realize that the person balancing the spreadsheets is the only person who knows exactly how fragile your leverage actually is. Corinne finally found her voice, though it was nothing more than a raspy whisper. Maya, she gasped, gripping the marble desk so tightly her knuckles were white. What are you doing here? Why are you wearing that suit? Caldwell said you were a corporate predator. He said you owned our house. I looked at the woman who had spent 31 years trying to make me feel invisible. Caldwell was telling the truth. I stated simply, I am a senior partner at Apex Partners. I am the sole managing director of Horizon Vanguard. My father transferred the Buckhead estate and all associated assets to me 2 years ago, because he knew you and Alicia would eventually try to sell his legacy to a con artist. He asked me to protect the family wealth from your overwhelming greed. And that is exactly what I have done. Alicia let out a loud, sobbing wail, shaking her head in violent denial. No, that is not fair, she cried, stomping her foot like a petulant child. Dad would never give everything to you. You are just a boring bookkeeper. You do not know anything about society or class. You stole it from us, Maya. You manipulated an old man and you stole our house. I did not steal anything, Alicia, I replied, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. I simply executed a legal directive. You and your husband are the ones who attempted to steal a $5 million mortgage using a property you did not own. You are the ones who funded a fake aristocratic lifestyle using the retirement savings of innocent people. I just stepped in to stop the bleeding. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his presence commanding immediate respect. Miss Wilson is one of the most brilliant forensic accountants in the country, he stated, his voice booming across the lobby. She has spent the last 2 years building an airtight federal case against this man. Our firm purchased his debt specifically so we could legally seize his remaining assets and liquidate his fraudulent fund. You are standing in our building, and you are speaking to a senior partner. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. The sheer power radiating from the CEO finally crushed whatever remaining delusion my mother and sister were clinging to. They were not dealing with family anymore. They were dealing with a massive corporate machine that had no capacity for pity or mercy. They were standing in the heart of the financial district, entirely bankrupt and completely exposed. They had pushed the quiet scapegoat into a corner, and the scapegoat had responded by buying the entire building and locking the doors. Spencer fell to his knees. The expensive fabric of his athletic pants hit the polished concrete floor with a dull thud. The man who had bragged about white wealth and international capital was now kneeling in front of a black woman begging for his freedom. He looked up at me, tears of absolute terror streaming down his face. The arrogant smirk was permanently erased. He was nothing more than a frightened thief facing the end of his life. The meeting was scheduled to begin 15 minutes ago. Spencer, I said, looking down at him with cold, calculated indifference. I suggest you get up from the floor. We have a massive amount of fraud to discuss, and I do not tolerate wasting time. Spencer did not move from his knees on the polished concrete floor. The crisp lines of his designer athletic wear seemed to sag around his body as if the fabric itself was giving up. He looked up at me, and the arrogant white privilege that had shielded him his entire life completely evaporated. For his whole existence, he had walked through the world assuming that his face, his gender, and his perfectly rehearsed corporate vocabulary would act as a universal hall pass. But looking at me flanked by a billionaire CEO, and a wall of security guards, Spencer finally realized that charm was entirely useless against a forensic accountant holding a mountain of federal evidence. The silence in the lobby was heavy, pressing down on him. Spencer let out a loud, pathetic sob. It was the ugly, desperate sound of a cornered animal realizing the trap was already sprung. His chest heaved as he reached a trembling hand toward the hem of my suit pants, though he did not dare actually touch the fabric. "Maya, please," he whimpered, his voice echoing weakly off the glass walls. "You have to listen to me. I never wanted to steal from those people. I was just trying to manage a temporary cash flow deficit. It was supposed to be a short-term bridge until the market corrected itself." I stared down at him, my expression completely unchanged. "You stole the retirement accounts of elderly church members to pay for a yacht rental," Spencer, I stated coldly. "That is not a cash flow deficit. That is a predatory criminal enterprise." Spencer shook his head violently, tears and sweat dripping off his chin and pooling on the pristine floor. "No, no, you do not understand," he cried, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. He suddenly twisted his body around, pointing a shaking finger directly at Alicia and Corinne, who were still standing frozen near the reception desk. "It was them," Spencer screamed, his face turning a blotchy purple. "They made me do it, Maya. They forced me to steal." Alicia gasped, taking a step back as if he had physically struck her. "Spencer, what are you saying?" She choked out, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "I am telling the truth," Spencer yelled, scrambling slightly to turn and face his wife and mother-in-law. His survival instinct had completely overridden any lingering shred of marital loyalty. He was aggressively throwing his passengers overboard to buy himself another second of air. "Before I met you, Alicia, my fund was perfectly legal. But then I married into this family. Corinne started demanding that we join the elite country clubs to maintain the Buckhead image." Corinne clutched her chest, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process the sheer audacity of his betrayal. "You arrogant liar," Corinne gasped. "You bragged about your wealth. You promised us the world." "Because you demanded the world," Corinne, Spencer shrieked, crawling backward on his knees to distance himself from them and get closer to me. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and manic. "Maya, you lived in that house. You know exactly what they are like. They are monsters." Alicia was spending $30,000 a month on clothes and spa treatments. Corinne was forcing me to host lavish dinners for local politicians just so she could brag to her church friends. When I told Alicia we needed to cut back on expenses, she threatened to divorce me and take half my firm. She said she would humiliate me in front of the entire Atlanta financial sector if I could not provide the lifestyle she deserved. Alicia let out a gut-wrenching sob, burying her face in her hands. She was watching the perfect, wealthy gentleman she had worshipped for years transform into a cowardly, sniveling traitor right in front of her eyes. The man who was supposed to elevate her social standing, the man she had used to humiliate me and prove her superiority, was currently on his knees begging the sister she despised. He was viciously throwing her to the wolves to save his own skin without a second thought. The foundation of her entire identity was built on this marriage, and now the marriage was revealed to be nothing more than a cheap transactional shield for a common thief. "I did not have a choice," Maya, Spencer continued, crying hysterically and pulling at his own hair. "They put a gun to my head financially. She knew the money was not coming from legitimate returns. She knew I was moving capital from new investors to pay her credit card bills. She asked me to do it. She actively encouraged the fraud just so she could keep taking pictures for her social media pages." "That is a lie!" Alicia screamed, her voice cracking. "I did not know anything about your offshore accounts. You told me you were a financial genius. You signed the tax returns." Alicia, Spencer roared back at her. "You signed the documents for the shell companies. You are legally complicit in every single wire fraud charge." Spencer turned back to me, ignoring his wife's devastated sobbing. He clasped his hands together in a prayer motion, looking up at me with absolute pathetic desperation. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "I can help you. I can give Apex Partners everything. I have hidden ledgers. I will give you total access to my servers. He took a deep, ragged breath, leaning forward so his forehead almost touched the concrete floor near my shoes. I will testify against them, Maya. I swear to God I will stand up in a federal courtroom and testify against Alicia and Corinne. I will tell the judge that they orchestrated the entire Ponzi scheme. I will say they blackmailed me into moving the funds. I will wear a wire. I will gather evidence against their friends in Buckhead. I will give the feds a dozen other corrupt executives in my network. Just let me walk away. Please, Maya. Take the house, take the cars, take my firm, but please do not give my master file to the FBI. Just let me disappear. The sheer cowardice of his offer hung heavily in the cold air of the lobby. Spencer, the epitome of white corporate privilege, was actively offering to send his black wife and mother-in-law to federal prison under false pretenses just to secure his own freedom. He was willing to burn their entire existence to ashes if it meant he could escape the consequences of his own monumental greed. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the broken man weeping at my feet. I then looked over at Alicia and Corinne. They were clutching each other, shivering in their wrinkled clothes, staring at Spencer with a mixture of profound revulsion and pure terror. The illusion of their perfect family was entirely obliterated, leaving behind a toxic wasteland of betrayal. There was no loyalty here. There was no love. There was only the frantic, vicious scrambling of parasites realizing the host was dead. The irony was almost too heavy to process. My mother had banished me from my own home to protect this man, and now this exact man was actively negotiating a plea deal to send my mother to a federal penitentiary. The silence returned to the lobby, broken only by the sound of Alicia's ragged sobbing and Spencer's desperate hyperventilating. They were all waiting for my response. They were waiting for the senior partner to render her final judgment on their pathetic lives. The silence hanging in the massive lobby was so absolute that I could hear the frantic, ragged breathing of the man kneeling at my feet. Spencer remained frozen on the floor, his tear-streaked face turned up toward me, waiting for a lifeline that was never going to come. He had just offered up his wife and his mother-in-law as sacrificial lambs to the federal government. He thought his betrayal would buy his freedom. He did not even realize the storm he had just unleashed behind him. A low, guttural sound broke the quiet. It did not sound human. It sounded like an animal that had just been backed into a corner and stabbed. I looked up from Spencer and watched my sister snap. Alicia had spent her entire life carefully curating every single aspect of her existence. She had meticulously built a flawless persona based on elite sororities, luxury brands, and an absolute sense of superiority over everyone around her. Her marriage to Spencer was the crown jewel of her delusion. He was supposed to be her ultimate ticket to untouchable wealth and status. And now the man she had worshipped, the man she had used as a weapon against me for years, had just offered to send her to a federal penitentiary to save his own skin. The shock on Alicia's face warped into pure, unadulterated rage. She let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed violently off the glass walls of the Apex Partners headquarters. She lunged forward, launching herself across the polished concrete floor. She slammed into Spencer from behind with the force of a freight train. Spencer let out a yelp of surprise as Alicia's momentum sent them both crashing hard against the unforgiving floor. Her manicured fingernails, which she usually maintained with religious devotion, turned into absolute claws. She grabbed the collar of his expensive athletic shirt and ripped it completely down the middle, the fabric tearing with a loud, sharp sound. "You coward!" Alicia screamed, her voice cracking as she struck his chest over and over again. "You pathetic, lying coward! I gave you everything. I defended you. I mocked my own sister for you, and you would sell me out to the feds to save yourself. You promised me an empire, Spencer. You promised me we were untouchable." Spencer scrambled frantically, trying to shield his face from his wife's assault. He pushed back against her, his own panic making him clumsy and desperate. "Get off me, Alicia," he yelled, his voice shrill. "You heard the lawyer. We are completely bankrupt. The feds are going to put me in a cage for 20 years. I have to give them something to negotiate with. You were happy to spend the stolen money when you were buying designer bags. You can share the blame now." Alicia shrieked in absolute fury, slapping him across the face with a loud crack that made several security guards wince. "You told me you were a financial genius," she sobbed, hitting him again. "You told me you were managing leverage. You made me look like a fool in front of my entire community. You ruined my life." Corinne had been standing frozen near the reception desk, watching her golden child and her perfect son-in-law physically brawl on the floor of a corporate lobby. The matriarch of Buckhead, the woman who had kicked me out of my childhood home just to protect her social standing, was witnessing the complete and total incineration of her aristocratic facade. The reality of Spencer's betrayal finally registered in her brain. The son-in-law she had paraded around her church congregation, the man she had allowed to disrespect her own husband, was nothing but a cowardly thief who was actively planning to throw her in prison. Corinne let out a horrifying wail of despair and charged into the fray. She threw herself onto the floor next to Alicia, her expensive silk robe dragging across the polished concrete. She grabbed Spencer's shoulder and began shaking him violently, her perfect hair unraveling completely and falling in messy strands across her face. "You manipulative sociopath," Corinne shrieked, her voice hoarse and broken. "We let you into our family. We trusted you with our legacy. You sat at my dinner table and promised me you would protect my daughters. And now you want to send me to jail for your crimes. I am an upstanding member of Buckhead society. I serve on charity boards. I will not go to prison for a pathetic thief like you. I will destroy you, Spencer. I will hire the best lawyers in the city, and I will make sure you never see the outside of a cell again." Spencer shoved Corinne away, his eyes wild with fear and anger. "With what money, Corinne?" He laughed, a harsh, hysterical sound. Maya froze. "Your accounts, remember. You do not have a single dollar to your name. You cannot even afford a public defender right now. You are broke, Corinne. You are just a broke old woman sitting on the floor of a lobby you do not own." The three of them dissolved into a chaotic tangle of screaming, crying, and physical violence. Alicia was pulling Spencer's hair while Corinne slapped at his arms. Spencer was yelling obscenities at both of them, frantically trying to crawl away, while simultaneously trying to protect his face. It was the absolute lowest, most degrading display of human behavior I had ever witnessed. The polished, wealthy facade had been completely ripped away, exposing the toxic, desperate parasites crawling underneath. The head security guard stepped forward, his hand reaching for the radio on his belt. He looked at me, awaiting instructions. He was ready to call his team in and forcibly drag my family out of the building to save the firm from further embarrassment. Marcus, the CEO, standing beside me, shifted his weight, clearly disgusted by the brawl happening in his pristine lobby. I raised my hand slightly, keeping my palm flat. I did not say a word, but the gesture was clear. "Stand down. Let them fight." Marcus nodded slowly, signaling the security team to hold their positions. We stood there in our tailored suits, watching the destruction unfold. I did not intervene. I did not try to stop the madness or offer any words of comfort. I simply crossed my arms and watched my abusers destroy each other. For 31 years, they had treated me like garbage. They had gaslighted me, minimized my achievements, and demanded my absolute submission. They had built a fortress of lies and used me as the foundation. But the moment real pressure was applied, the moment their fake wealth was threatened, they instantly turned into rabid dogs. There was no loyalty, there was no family bond, there was only self-preservation at any cost. I watched Alicia weeping hysterically as she pounded her fists against the chest of the man she had used to elevate her social status. I watched my mother, the proud and arrogant queen of Buckhead, rolling around on a concrete floor, screaming insults at a common criminal. They were doing exactly what I knew they would do. They were tearing themselves apart from the inside out. I did not feel pity. I did not feel anger. I felt a profound sense of validation. This was the justice my father had envisioned when he secretly handed me the keys to the kingdom. He knew their greed would eventually consume them, and he wanted me to be safely out of the blast radius when the explosion finally happened. I stood perfectly still, letting the chaotic noise wash over me. The conflict had reached its boiling point, and they were burning themselves alive in the process. The quiet, invisible daughter had not raised a single finger, but she had won the war entirely. I let the pathetic display drag on for exactly 3 minutes. Marcus shifted his weight beside me, signaling that the spectacle had run its course. The security guards were exchanging glances, waiting for my command to intervene. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. The sound cut cleanly through the chaos of their screaming and fighting. I cleared my throat once. It was a single sharp sound that immediately froze the 3 bodies writhing on the ground. Spencer stopped pulling at his torn athletic shirt. Alicia froze with her hand raised, ready to strike her husband again. Corinne stopped screaming, her chest heaving as she knelt on the hard floor. They all turned their heads to look at me, panting and sweating like cornered animals. I walked slowly toward the massive reception desk, where one of my associates had discreetly placed a thick manila folder just moments before. I picked it up. It was an exact replica of the folder I had left on my bed in Buckhead. I looked down at Spencer, who was still breathing heavily on his hands and knees. "You misunderstood your situation, Spencer," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air of the lobby. "You think your biggest problem is that you bankrupted my mother and sister. You think you are just dealing with angry family members and a hostile corporate buyout. You are severely underestimating the scale of your own incompetence." Spencer blinked, his bloodshot eyes staring at the folder in my hands. "What do you mean?" he rasped, his voice trembling. "You bought the debt, Maya. You control the fund now. You said you were the managing director. You own the liabilities." I tapped the thick folder with my index finger, the sound echoing in the quiet space. "I bought your toxic debt, Spencer, because it gave Apex Partners the legal right to seize your corporate servers during the foreclosure process. We needed direct access to your internal communications to verify the audit. And what we found was much worse than a simple Ponzi scheme built on country club donations and church retirement funds." Alicia slowly pushed herself off the floor, her ruined dress hanging off her shoulder. "What did he do, Maya?" she whispered, her voice hollow and completely defeated. "He did not just steal from your wealthy friends, Alicia," I explained, keeping my eyes locked on Spencer. "The fake international clients he kept bragging about, the offshore accounts he used to hide his massive losses, those accounts were not completely empty. He was actively receiving incoming wire transfers from heavily sanctioned foreign entities. He was attempting to launder money for clients that are currently on federal watch lists. He thought mixing dirty foreign money with stolen retirement funds would hide the trail." Spencer's face went from a pale gray to a sickening shade of chalk white. His jaw dropped open, but no sound came out. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He thought he had buried those international transactions deep in the encrypted code of his servers. He had no idea a forensic accountant had been reviewing every single keystroke he made over the last 2 years. "You did not just steal from the family, Spencer," I said, taking a deliberate step closer to him. "You committed federal wire fraud and international money laundering. You defrauded federal clients, and you used my father's legacy as collateral to cover your tracks. You thought you were playing a high-stakes game of leverage, but you were just a sloppy, arrogant criminal leaving digital fingerprints on massive federal crimes." Corinne scrambled backward on the floor, trying to physically distance herself from her son-in-law. She looked at him as if he were a live explosive device. "Federal crimes?" She choked out, her voice breaking. "Spencer, you promised me you were managing safe assets. You promised me we were secure in Buckhead." Spencer ignored her entirely. He scrambled toward my feet, his hands clasped together in a desperate panic. "Maya, you cannot show them those files," he begged, his voice breaking into a hysterical sob. "They will lock me away forever. You have the only copies, Maya. You bought the debt. You own the servers now. You can delete the offshore logs. You can wipe the transactions clean. Please, Maya. I am family. I am Alicia's husband. You can just bury the files in the corporate restructuring and let me walk away." I looked down at the man who had offered me a minimum wage job in his basement just 12 hours ago. I looked at the man who had mocked my public education and insulted my intelligence while actively stealing my father's money. He was leaning entirely on his white privilege, hoping that a few tears and a plea for family loyalty would erase years of systematic abuse and federal fraud. I let out a soft, cold laugh. It was the first time I had shown any emotion since walking into the lobby. "Bury the files," I repeated, shaking my head slowly. "You still do not understand how any of this works, Spencer. You still think you can charm your way out of a federal indictment." Alicia grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. "Maya, please!" She begged, her pride completely broken. "If they arrest him, they will freeze all our joint accounts. They will seize whatever is left of the estate. You have to help us. You have to hide the evidence. We are your family. You cannot let them put him in prison." I gently but firmly removed Alicia's hand from my arm. I smoothed the fabric of my suit jacket, making sure every line was perfect. Then I looked at the three of them shattered and weeping on the floor of my firm. The manila folder I left on my bed in Buckhead was just a courtesy notice, I explained, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. The metal USB drive resting on top of it was a copy of my forensic audit. I left it there so you would understand exactly why you were being evicted. I wanted you to see the evidence of your own destruction before the authorities arrived. Spencer stopped crying, his eyes widening as my words registered in his panicked brain. "A copy," he whispered. "Yes, a copy," I confirmed. "I am a senior partner at a private equity firm, Spencer. I do not leave original evidence sitting on a mattress in a house full of desperate criminals. The original encrypted drive containing every single log of your wire fraud, every forged signature, and every sanctioned transaction was sent directly to the federal authorities." Corinne let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with both hands as the finality of the situation crushed her. "I triggered the asset freeze at 3 o'clock this morning." I continued, making sure they heard every single word. "And at exactly 3:01 a.m., the original unredacted files were successfully transmitted to the Regional Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission. They have been reviewing your offshore accounts for the past 6 hours, Spencer. There is no deleting the files. There is no corporate restructuring that can save you. The trap was already closed before you even woke up this morning." Spencer collapsed completely, letting his body fall flat against the cold concrete floor. He curled into a fetal position, letting out a low, guttural moan of absolute defeat. The final shred of his arrogant privilege had been systematically dismantled and incinerated. There was no negotiation left. There was no leverage. There was only the cold, hard reality of decades in federal prison waiting for him. Alicia sank down next to him, staring at the wall with blank, empty eyes. She had finally realized that her entire life was a carefully constructed lie, and that the quiet sister she had bullied had just orchestrated the most flawless execution in corporate history. The quiet accountant had not just audited their finances, she had audited their entire existence and found them completely worthless. I stood in the silence of the massive corporate lobby, listening to the ragged breathing of the people who used to be my family. The heavy dread in the room was suddenly broken by a faint sound bleeding through the thick glass walls. It was distant at first, just a low wail echoing off the concrete canyons of downtown Atlanta. But it was growing louder by the second. Spencer stopped rocking back and forth on the floor. He lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes darting toward the revolving doors. He knew that sound. Anyone who spends their life stealing other people's money knows that sound. The wail of the sirens multiplied. It was not just one police cruiser, it was a coordinated federal convoy. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect violently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Apex Partners headquarters. The harsh, strobing colors washed over Alicia's ruined white dress and Corinne's pale, terrified face. They sat on the polished concrete, completely paralyzed, as 3 matte black SUVs aggressively mounted the curb right outside the building, blocking the main entrance entirely. The heavy doors of the vehicles swung open in unison. A team of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the FBI logo emblazoned across their broad backs stepped out onto the pavement. They moved with swift, tactical precision. There was no hesitation in their steps. They marched straight toward the revolving glass doors, projecting an aura of absolute ruin. The head security guard in my lobby stepped forward instinctively to intercept them, but Marcus simply raised a hand, holding him back. Marcus gave the lead federal agent a brief nod of professional courtesy, allowing them unrestricted access to our building. This was a scheduled execution, and Apex Partners was fully cooperating. Spencer tried to scramble backward, but there was nowhere left to go. His designer sneakers slipped on the polished floor, his muscles failing him completely. He let out a pathetic whining sound, scrambling like an insect, until his back hit the cold marble of the reception desk. He pulled his knees to his chest, burying his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably as the agents quickly surrounded him. 4 agents closed the circle immediately. Their presence was commanding and absolute. They did not yell or draw their weapons. They did not need to. The sheer weight of federal authority pressing down on him was enough to crush whatever tiny shred of arrogance Spencer had left in his body. Spencer Blackwood. The lead agent stated, his voice a flat, uncompromising baritone that echoed through the quiet lobby. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Alicia screamed, pressing her hands against her ears, as if blocking the sound would somehow make the terrifying reality disappear. She watched in sheer disbelief as 2 agents reached down and hauled her husband roughly to his feet. Spencer's legs could barely support his own weight. He was a limp, sweating mess of a man. The illusion of his white corporate privilege, the shield he had used to patronize me and elevate himself above my family, was entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but a desperate common criminal waiting to be caged. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, the agent commanded, stepping behind him. Spencer did not resist. He turned, facing the cold marble desk. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoing through the lobby was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice finally closing its jaws around the predator who had tried to consume my father's legacy and discard me in the process. They read him his rights as they tightened the steel cuffs around his wrists. You have the right to remain silent, the agent recited, dragging him away from the desk. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Spencer looked over his shoulder, trying to catch my eye one last time. His face was a mask of absolute despair. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps a final apology, or another pathetic plea for mercy, but the agents did not give him the chance. They grabbed him firmly by the arms and marched him toward the revolving doors. We all watched in absolute silence as the supposed financial genius, the man my mother had worshipped and my sister had used to elevate her social status, was paraded out of the building in handcuffs. The morning commuters on the sidewalks of Atlanta stopped to stare, pointing and taking photos with their cell phones. The wealthy executive was being publicly humiliated. Spencer was shoved roughly into the back of a black SUV. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. The convoy pulled away from the curb, the sirens wailing once again as they carried him off to a federal holding cell. His career was destroyed. His reputation was incinerated. His life as a wealthy Buckhead elite was permanently over. The flashing lights faded down the street, leaving the corporate lobby feeling strangely hollow and incredibly quiet. Alicia was slumped against a pillar, weeping silently, her spirit completely broken. She had lost her husband, her stolen wealth, and her highly curated social standing in the span of 10 minutes. She had nothing left but the wrinkled clothes on her back and the horrible realization that she was legally tied to a convicted felon. But Corinne was not ready to surrender. My mother had spent her entire adult life curating a perfect image of untouchable wealth and superiority. The thought of losing her status, of facing her wealthy church friends and country club associates as a bankrupt outcast, was a fate worse than death to her. She slowly pushed herself up from the cold floor. Her silk robe was dirty, and her hair was a tangled mess, but the desperate survival instinct of a narcissist was still burning in her dark eyes. She looked at the glass doors where Spencer had just disappeared, and then she turned slowly to look at me. She took a shaky step forward. Her previous arrogance was finally gone, replaced by a groveling, pathetic desperation. She realized that her only remaining lifeline in this world was the quiet daughter she had aggressively thrown away just hours before. Maya, she whispered, her voice trembling as she closed the distance between us. Maya, please, you have to listen to me. I did not move a single muscle. I simply watched her approach my face, a blank, unreadable mask. Corinne stopped a few feet away from me. Her legs finally gave out, and the proud, untouchable matriarch of the Buckhead Society slowly sank to her knees. She fell to the polished concrete floor, looking up at me with heavy tears streaming down her ruined face. She reached out her hands, grasping at the empty air just inches from my tailored suit pants, afraid to actually touch me. Maya, you have to help us, Corinne begged, her voice cracking into a loud, pathetic sob. You have to let us keep the house. You cannot take the mansion away from me, Maya. It is my home. It is where I raised you. It is everything I have left. I looked down at her. This was the exact same woman who had laughed when 27 relatives mocked me. This was the woman who had demanded I kneel before my sister on her foyer floor. And now she was the one kneeling, crying for mercy on the floor of my corporate fortress. We are family. Maya Corinne wept, bowing her head so low she was almost touching my shoes. We share the same blood. You are my daughter. You cannot put your own mother out on the street like a common beggar. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize to you in front of the whole church congregation. I will tell everyone how successful and brilliant you are. Just please let me keep the Buckhead house. I cannot face my friends, Maya. I cannot let them see me poor and homeless. They will destroy me. They will laugh at me behind my back. Please, you have to protect your family blood. Her plea was entirely self-serving. Even now, kneeling in the absolute wreckage of her life, she was only concerned about her fragile social standing. She was not sorry for how she treated me. She was not sorry for being complicit in fraud. She was only sorry that her elite friends were going to find out she was completely broke. She invoked the concept of family blood only when it benefited her, ignoring the terrible fact that she had been perfectly willing to bleed me dry just 12 hours ago. The sheer audacity of her request was staggering, but it was also incredibly validating. My mother, the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel incredibly small, was currently begging for my scraps. She was finally acknowledging my absolute power over her existence. I looked at her weeping on the floor, surrounded by the shattered remains of her false empire, and I prepared to deliver the final killing blow. I stood perfectly still, letting the echo of my mother's desperate pleas fade into the vast open space of the corporate lobby. She was gripping the fabric of my trousers now, her tears leaving dark, wet stains on the immaculate gray wool. For a fleeting moment, a memory flashed through my mind. I was 10 years old, standing in the kitchen of our first home, showing her a perfect report card, hoping for just a fraction of the pride she showered on Alicia. She had barely glanced at it, telling me that grades did not matter if I lacked the social grace to secure a powerful husband. She had dismissed my entire worth with a wave of her hand. And now here she was, 31 years later, clutching my ankles and praying for salvation from the very daughter she had relentlessly tried to erase. I slowly reached down and pried her trembling fingers off my suit. The movement was gentle, but it contained a finality that made her gasp. I took a deliberate step back, forcing her to look up at me from the cold, polished concrete. Her face was a ruin of running mascara and stark terror. "You want to talk about family blood, Corinne?" I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm frequency that commanded the absolute attention of everyone in the lobby. You invoke the concept of family only when you are the one bleeding. When you stood in that foyer last night, surrounded by 27 laughing relatives, you did not see family. You saw an easy target. You saw a punching bag you could use to elevate your own pathetic status. You told me to pack my cheap clothes and leave in the dead of night. You told me that I was a stain on your perfect aristocratic life. Corinne sobbed loudly, shaking her head in frantic denial. "I did not mean it, Maya," she cried, her voice raw and grating. "I was just angry. I was just trying to protect our standing. You have to understand the pressure I was under. Please, you cannot take my home. You cannot put me out on the street. I will have nothing." I looked down at her, feeling a profound sense of closure washing over my entire body. The heavy chains of generational trauma and maternal expectations simply snapped and fell away. "You are right about one thing," I replied, my tone dropping to ice. "You do have nothing. But it is not because of me. It is because you chose to build a kingdom on a foundation of lies and stolen money. And as for the mansion, it stopped being your home the moment you tried to steal my father's legacy to fund a federal criminal." Alicia let out a hollow, whimpering sound from her spot near the marble pillar. She had completely given up wrapping her arms around her knees and rocking back and forth. Her designer dress was ripped and stained, her perfect world entirely pulverized. I took a deep breath, letting the chilled air of the lobby fill my lungs. I looked directly into my mother's panicked eyes, and I delivered the exact same sentence she had hurled at me just hours ago. "Failures do not belong in my house, Corinne," I stated, enunciating every single syllable with crystal clarity. The words struck her like a physical blow. Her jaw went slack, and the remaining color completely drained from her face. She recognized the phrase instantly. It was the ultimate karmic echo rebounding off the glass walls of my corporate empire and crushing her completely. I did not stop there. I needed her to understand the absolute totality of her eviction. "You told me to pack my bags and leave before sunrise." I continued, my voice echoing in the silent room. "So I did. And while you were driving here thinking you could bully me into submission, I authorized the Horizon Vanguard security team to enter the Buckhead property. They arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. They did not pack your things in expensive designer luggage, Corinne. They used heavy-duty industrial trash bags and cheap cardboard boxes. They cleared out your master suite. They cleared out Alicia's guest room. They took every piece of clothing, every pair of shoes, and every scrap of fake wealth you accumulated over the past 2 years." Corinne let out a horrifying, choked gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as the visual image of her destruction finally took hold. "They did not leave your belongings in the foyer," I added mercilessly. "I gave them very specific instructions. Your trash bags are currently sitting right on the curb at the end of the driveway. They are sitting in the hot Atlanta sun, right where all of your elite country club neighbors can see them as they drive by. The locks have already been changed. The gate codes have been wiped. Your access to the estate is permanently terminated. You are officially trespassing if you even step foot on the grass." "No." Corinne screamed a visceral, agonizing wail that tore from the depths of her throat. "No, Maya, you cannot do this to me. My friends will see. The church elders will see. They will know we are ruined. You are destroying my entire life." "You destroyed your own life, Corinne," I corrected, stepping back one final time. "I am just the forensic accountant handing you the final receipt." She reached for me again, crawling forward on her knees, her hands grasping desperately at the empty air. "Please, Maya, please, I am your mother. I gave you life. You owe me." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, shutting the door on our relationship forever. "The only thing I owed was a promise to my father to protect his legacy from parasites. That debt is paid in full today. You and Alicia are no longer my problem. You are no longer my family. You are just two bankrupt women sitting on the floor of a building you do not belong in." I turned my head and looked at the head security guard, who had been waiting silently by the reception desk. I gave him a single sharp nod. The guard immediately stepped forward, signaling to 3 other men in dark suits. They moved with swift professional efficiency. 2 guards grabbed Corinne by the arms, hoisting her up from the floor as she kicked and screamed, fighting wildly against their grip. The other 2 guards hauled Alicia to her feet. My sister did not fight back. She just hung limply between them, a hollow, broken shell of a woman weeping silently as they dragged her across the polished concrete. "No!" Maya Corinne shrieked, her voice echoing terribly as the guards pulled her toward the revolving glass doors. "You cannot do this. I am your mother. You are a monster, Maya. You are a monster." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides. I watched as the guards pushed them through the revolving doors out into the sweltering heat of the busy downtown street. They stumbled onto the pavement surrounded by passing pedestrians who stopped to stare at the hysterical older woman and her weeping daughter. They had no cars. They had no credit cards. They had no cash. They had absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs and a pile of trash bags waiting for them miles away on a curb in Buckhead. I turned my back to the glass doors, completely severing the tie. The heavy silence of the corporate lobby returned, wrapping around me like a warm protective blanket. The boundary was permanently sealed. The execution was flawless. I walked back toward the private executive elevator, leaving their screams to fade away into the noise of the city. Exactly 1 year has passed since the morning I watched the heavy glass doors of the Apex building slide shut, trapping my mother and sister out on the sweltering Atlanta pavement. A full year has passed, washing away the toxic residue they left behind in my life. My world has finally settled into a rhythm of absolute peace and profound purpose. The Buckhead Mansion. The sprawling brick estate that used to be a monument to my mother's suffocating arrogance and fake aristocratic aspirations looks completely different now. I did not sell the property. Selling it would have been an easy transaction, but it would not have honored the true legacy my father wanted to leave behind. Instead, I spent the last 12 months gutting the interior and transforming the massive space into the Roland Vanguard Center for Financial Literacy. The formal dining room where my mother used to host pretentious dinner parties and hurl insults is now a state-of-the-art computer lab. The marble foyer, where I was told to kneel and beg, is now a vibrant reception area, welcoming young women of color from underserved neighborhoods across the city. We provide them with full scholarships, intensive mentorship, and elite training in forensic accounting and investment strategy. I walk through those halls now, and I do not hear the cruel laughter of 27 relatives. I hear the sound of brilliant young Black women learning how to build generational wealth block by block. They are learning how to read the fine print, how to spot predatory loans, and how to leverage their own capital. They are learning the exact skills I used to protect my father's estate. Giving them the power to secure their own futures is the ultimate realization of what Black excellence actually means. It is about lifting up your community and building fortresses that no con artist can ever tear down. While the mansion thrives with new life, the people who tried to steal it are currently drowning in the harsh reality of the consequences they earned. Alicia did not get her luxury yacht rental. She did not get to expand her fake empire. Instead, she got a masterclass in what it means to work for a living. When Spencer was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for international money laundering and wire fraud, he left her with absolutely nothing but a mountain of toxic debt and a ruined surname. The government seized every asset tied to his fraudulent fund, leaving Alicia completely destitute. Today, the woman who used to spend $30,000 a month on spa treatments wears a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform. She now works a grueling minimum-wage retail job at a discount department store in a dying suburban mall, miles away from the glamorous boutiques of Buckhead. She spends her days standing on her feet for 9 hours straight, folding cheap sweaters and ringing up clearance items for customers she used to look down upon. Sometimes women from her old elite sorority walk into the store and Alicia has to hide in the stockroom, crying into her hands to avoid the sheer crushing humiliation of being seen wiping down the checkout counter. She has no car, so she takes the public bus home to a cramped studio apartment she shares with 2 roommates. Her entire identity was built on the illusion of marrying into higher society, and now she is trapped at the very bottom of the economic ladder with absolutely no way out. My mother Corinne suffered an even more poetic downfall. For her entire adult life, she weaponized her social standing to belittle anyone she deemed unworthy. She thrived on the admiration of her church congregation and country club associates. But the moment the federal agents hauled her perfect son-in-law out of my corporate lobby in handcuffs, her meticulously curated social bubble instantly vaporized. The women who laughed at me during that family dinner were the first to cut ties with her. They blocked her number and removed her from the charity boards. The church elders politely but firmly asked her to stop attending Sunday services because her association with a massive federal Ponzi scheme brought unwanted negative attention to the congregation. Corinne was entirely exiled from the only world she ever cared about. She now lives in a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, a space smaller than the master bathroom she used to occupy. The walls are thin, the carpets are stained, and she spends her days sitting alone on a cheap sofa clutching faded photographs of the Buckhead estate. She has no friends left to call. She has no society events to attend. She is just a bitter, lonely older woman completely consumed by the toxic vanity that ultimately destroyed her. She tried reaching out to me 6 months ago, sending a rambling email begging for financial assistance. I did not reply. I did not even read the entire message. I simply dragged it into the trash folder and emptied the bin. The boundary I set that morning in the lobby remains absolutely impenetrable. The sun begins to set over the Atlanta skyline, casting a warm, brilliant glow across the glass towers of the financial district. I am standing on the private balcony of my penthouse office at Apex Partners, looking out over the city that I conquered on my own terms. The evening air is refreshing, carrying the faint hum of traffic far below. I am wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, holding a crystal glass of expensive red wine. The heavy burdens of seeking validation and making myself small to comfort the fragile egos of toxic people are completely gone. My mind is sharper than it has ever been. My corporate empire is undeniably secure, and my heart is completely at peace. I take a slow sip of the wine, letting the rich flavor settle on my tongue. I am standing at the absolute pinnacle of my life, looking out over the world completely untouchable and beautifully free. The best revenge is not screaming back. It is not throwing a tantrum or fighting in the mud with people who want to drag you down. The best revenge is legally dismantling their ego and building a fortress they can never enter. Have you ever used the cold, hard truth to crush a toxic person's fake facade? Let me know your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe.